I remember the exact smell of that night. Leftover coffee going cold on the counter. The faint scent of my dog's fur. She was pressed against my leg, already half asleep. Rain tapping the window like it had somewhere else to be. It was a Sunday. Late. Maybe 10 o'clock. I was on my couch in my apartment in the city, scrolling through nothing. The kind of mindless scrolling you do when you're tired but not ready to sleep. Work had been brutal that week. A project deadline. Back-to-back calls. My boyfriend was out of town for work, so it was just me and Maple. That's my dog. And the quiet. Everything felt completely ordinary. And then my phone buzzed. I looked down. One new message. The name on the screen was my younger brother's. Daniel. We didn't text often. Not anymore. So I sat up a little. Opened it. And I read it once. Hey, just wanted to let you know. Mom and Dad left the house to me. You're not in the will. Sorry. I read it again. Then a third time. My eyes kept moving over those words like if I looked long enough, they'd rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Something kinder. Something with a but at the end. Something with a follow-up message that said, just kidding, or we need to talk, or literally anything else. Nothing came. 23 words. That's all it took to erase 29 years. I put my phone face down on the cushion. I didn't move for a long time. Maple lifted her head, looked at me, and put it back down like she understood I needed quiet. I didn't cry right away. That's the thing nobody tells you about shock. It doesn't feel like sadness at first. It feels like static, like the world kept moving but something inside you just stopped. My name is Elena. I'm 29 years old. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest, the oldest daughter of 2 immigrant parents who worked themselves to the bone to build a life in this country. And this is the story of how they chose my brother over me, and how I eventually chose myself. I need to start at the beginning, because you can't understand what that text meant without understanding where I came from. I grew up in a 2-story house on a quiet street in a small Midwestern town. The kind of town where everyone waves at you from their driveway, where the grocery store closes at 9 and the neighbors still bring casseroles when someone's sick. From the outside, our house looked like every other house on that block. White siding, green shutters, a porch light that had been crooked for as long as I could remember. My dad always meant to fix it, and somehow never did. Inside, it smelled like cumin and coffee and the particular cleanness that comes from a home where people work too hard to let things get messy. My parents. I'll call them Mom and Dad because that's how I thought of them for most of my life. Came to this country with almost nothing. 2 suitcases. A phone number for a distant cousin. And the kind of determination that doesn't come from confidence, it comes from having no other choice. They built their lives from scratch. Dad drove a delivery truck for the first 8 years. Mom cleaned houses on weekends when she wasn't working her weekday job at a packaging plant. They saved every dollar like it was a small miracle. And slowly, carefully, they bought that house. It was everything to them. I understood that even as a child. I was born first. 3 years later, my brother Daniel arrived, and everything shifted in a way I wouldn't fully understand until much later. From the time I was old enough to notice things, I noticed this. Daniel got more. Not always more food. Not always more toys. But more attention. More softness. More of the looks parents give when they're genuinely delighted by someone. Daniel was loud, expressive, dramatic in the way youngest children sometimes are. He cried loudly when he was hurt. He laughed loudly when he was happy. He demanded to be seen. And he was. I was the quiet one. The one who cleaned her room without being asked. The one who did her homework at the kitchen table before dinner and put her dishes in the sink after. The one who understood early that being invisible was easier than being in the way. My parents praised me for this. They'd say things like, "Thank God we have at least one easy child in front of company," smiling like they were bragging. But even then, at 8, 9, 10 years old, something about those words made me feel less like a daughter and more like a convenience. I was easy to manage, so they didn't manage me. I was good at taking care of myself, so they let me. I didn't have the language for it then. But looking back, I can name it now. I was parentified before I was old enough to vote. The responsible one. The mature one. The one who didn't need anything, and therefore didn't get much. The first time I understood what this meant in real, concrete terms, I was 12 years old. My parents had been saving for a vacation. I remember being excited. I'd never been to the beach. I'd seen pictures, the wide flat shine of the water, the way sand looked like it went on forever. I'd been quietly dreaming about it for months. One evening at dinner, my mom said, "We've been thinking about the trip. It's expensive to bring everyone. Elena, you're old enough to understand. You'll stay with Grandma this time. Daniel's never seen the ocean." He needs this more. I remember nodding. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I sat at the table and nodded like a child who had been trained to understand she was the one who could handle disappointment. They left on a Friday. I stayed with my grandmother, who was kind and fed me good food and let me watch whatever I wanted on TV. I told myself it was fine. Then they came back, and the living room filled up with photographs. Daniel in the water. Daniel with an ice cream cone. Daniel on Dad's shoulders, arms out wide like he was flying, both of them laughing. There was not a single photo of me. Of course there wasn't. I hadn't been there. But something about seeing all that joy, a whole memory made without me, felt like a door closing somewhere inside. Quiet. Click. Shut. I told myself I was mature enough to handle it. What I was, actually, was 11 years into learning that my needs were optional. That same lesson repeated for years afterward, in small ways that seemed reasonable one at a time and only looked like a pattern when you stepped back. Daniel got a new laptop for school. He needs it more. I shared the old family desktop until I got a part-time job at 16 and bought my own. Daniel got a car at 17. My parents helped him pick it out, negotiated the price, paid the insurance. When I turned 17, my mom said, "You're so responsible, you'll figure it out." I saved for 3 years and bought a 10-year-old Honda with 140,000 miles. Daniel's college tuition, fully covered. He's still finding himself. My college fund was about a third of what it needed to be. I took out loans. I worked. I found myself anyway. At the time, each one of these things had an explanation. Reasonable, logical, context-dependent. But I kept track. The way you track things when you're not sure they're okay, but you don't want to say it out loud yet. By the time I was in my early 20s, I had internalized something I didn't even realize I believed. I was the one who was fine on her own. I moved out at 22, got a job in the city, moved into a small apartment that my parents called impractical, and my mother once described as lonely-looking. I decorated it myself, learned to cook real meals, built a life piece by piece like a puzzle I was assembling alone. My parents told people, "Elena is so independent," always with a kind of pride that also felt like a goodbye. And when things were hard, when I got laid off from my first real job and had to pick up freelance work to cover rent, when I got sick and had to navigate health insurance alone for the first time, when I went through a painful breakup and cried on my bathroom floor at 2 a.m., I didn't call home. Because home wasn't a place I went to be held. Home was a place where they expected me to already be fine. Meanwhile, Daniel was in and out of our parents' house well into his mid-20s. He dropped out of his first college. They paid for a second one. He had a falling out with a roommate. He moved back home for 8 months. He started a business that didn't work out. They covered his losses. Every time, the answer was, "Of course, we'll help." Not once did anyone say, "You need to figure this out on your own, Daniel." That phrase? The one they saved for me? I started to realize it wasn't a compliment. It was a closed door wearing the mask of one. I was 25 when I first heard the word spoken out loud in the context of our family. I was visiting for the holidays. My dad was on the phone with one of his brothers, my uncle, and I was in the kitchen refilling my glass of water. I wasn't trying to listen, but his voice carried. "No, the house will go to Daniel. Elena is fine on her own. She doesn't need it." I stood at the sink with the water running. I didn't move. I think I stood there for almost a minute, just letting the water run, pretending to look for something in the cabinet so no one would see my face. I told myself it might have been hypothetical. Old people talk about wills and property the way they talk about the weather. Casually, not necessarily meaning anything. Maybe it was a draft. Maybe it was a thought, not a decision. But the seed was planted. From that night on, I started listening differently. I noticed when the conversation turned to property or money and watched who was included and who was quietly moved to the edges. I noticed how my mother would say, "We'll talk about it later," if I asked directly, and how Daniel never seemed to need to ask at all. I noticed his confidence. He knew. He had been told. Maybe not in those words, but in the 1,000 ways families communicate the things they don't say out loud. He was the one who was staying. He was the one who belonged. He was the one who would inherit. I was the one who was fine. Everything accelerated when my mother had a heart attack. She was 68. It was a Tuesday morning. My dad called me, and his voice was the kind of quiet that told me everything before he said a word. I was on a flight home within 4 hours. For the next several months, I flew back every other weekend. I organized her medications. I made spreadsheets with her appointments, her prescriptions, her dietary restrictions. I stayed up late with her when she couldn't sleep, watching old TV shows we both half remembered from my childhood. I was there. Daniel called. He visited a few times. But he was building his new life. New city, new girlfriend, new job. He was busy in the way people are busy when they have options. I rearranged my entire schedule. I used all my vacation days. I paid for some of their medical bills when things got tight and didn't ask for it back. And then one afternoon, I overheard my parents on the phone with what I now understood was their estate lawyer. Daniel will be there Thursday. We'll finalize everything then. I was in the next room folding laundry. I knocked on the door, asked, "Should I be there too?" My mother smiled gently and said, "No, honey, we'll handle it. You've done so much already." I went back to folding laundry. I folded it very slowly because my hands had started shaking. So now you understand why 23 words hit me the way they did. Hey, just wanted to let you know. Mom and Dad left the house to me. You're not in the will. Sorry. It wasn't new information, exactly. It was a confirmation of something I had suspected, feared, and spent 4 years trying to convince myself wasn't happening. I called my mother. 3 rings. Then her voice, tired, already braced. "Is it true?" I asked. My voice was calm. I was impressed by how calm it was. "Did you leave the house to Daniel? Am I really not in the will?" A long pause. "Yes," she said. "Your father and I talked about it. We thought it was the right thing." "Why?" "You're independent, Elena. You've built your life. Daniel needs the stability. Daniel needs the stability." I had just spent 6 months flying home to fold laundry and manage her medication schedule, and Daniel needed the stability. "So me taking care of you, that didn't factor in?" "We love you equally," she said. "This is about what's practical." I said, "Okay," because I didn't know what else to say. Then I hung up, and I sat in that silence for a very long time. I didn't let it go immediately. I'm not built that way. Over the next few days, I had separate conversations with each of them. My mother, my father, even Daniel, who to his credit, did call, though he spent most of the call explaining why he deserved it rather than asking how I was. My father said, "You moved away. The house should stay with the family that stayed." I said, "I moved away because you raised me to be self-sufficient. Are you punishing me for that?" He didn't answer. My mother said, "We didn't mean to hurt you. We wanted to make sure the family was taken care of." I said, "I am family." She said, "Of course you are." But her eyes didn't quite meet mine. Daniel said, "Come on, Elena. You know this makes sense. You're doing great. You don't need it like I do." I said, "You deciding what I need is exactly the problem." He said I was being emotional. I said I thought that was probably appropriate given the situation. He didn't have a response to that. None of their explanations added up. Not together, not separately. I had been the one who showed up when Mom was sick. I had contributed to the household in ways that cost me time, money, and vacation days. I had never been taken care of the way Daniel had been. Not with the tuition, not with the car, not with the safety net that was always there for him and quietly absent for me. And now I was supposed to accept that the final accounting was also unequal and call it practical. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Not because of the money. I want to be honest about that. The house was real and the inheritance was real, but the wound went deeper than property. What broke me, quietly, slowly, in the middle of ordinary moments, was the meaning behind the decision. The house was the proof, the official record. The thing you put in a legal document when you're deciding who matters. And the document said, "Not you." I started having anxiety in a way I hadn't experienced before. Not full panic attacks, more like this constant low hum of dread that followed me through the day. I'd be in a meeting at work and suddenly think, they don't see me as their child the same way. I'd be grocery shopping and feel this wave of, not sadness exactly, more like vertigo. Like the ground I'd been standing on was slightly less solid than I'd thought. I called my best friend Priya more than I'd ever called anyone. I'd talk, she'd listen, she'd say the right things. But even with her, I felt like I was explaining something that didn't quite translate. A grief that didn't have a name because technically no one had died. Nothing had been taken from me. I'd just been excluded from something that had always been presented as mine. That's a specific kind of pain. Exclusion dressed as fairness. And the hardest part? I still loved my parents. I want to say that out loud because I think it matters. This isn't a story about hating your family. It's about loving people who didn't love you back with the same precision, and figuring out what to do with that. About a month after the text, I made an appointment with an estate attorney. Not because I was sure I wanted to fight, but because I needed information. I needed to understand what was real and what my options were, if I had any. The lawyer was a woman, which I was grateful for. She was matter-of-fact in a way that felt like kindness. She explained, If your parents were of sound mind when the will was made, and the will was executed legally, they have the right to leave their estate to whoever they choose, even one child and not another. There's no legal requirement for equal distribution. I asked about undue influence, whether Daniel might have pressured them. She said, if you have evidence, texts, emails, witnesses who can speak to their state of mind, you can contest it. But I'll be honest with you. These cases are expensive, emotionally exhausting, and courts are reluctant to overturn a will unless the evidence is very strong. I asked how much it would cost just to find out if I had a case. The number she gave me was significant. I thanked her and left, and I sat in my car in the parking garage for a while, thinking about something she'd said. They have the right to leave their estate to whoever they choose. Legal. Clean. Airtight. The law doesn't protect you from your family deciding you matter less. It just gives you expensive, exhausting options if you want to argue about it afterward. I decided I wasn't going to spend years fighting for something that, even if I won, would feel like losing. But I wasn't done. I flew home one more time, intentionally, with a plan. I wasn't going to fight. I wasn't going to scream or cry or demand anything be changed. I just needed to sit in a room with all three of them and say the things I'd been saying only to Priya in my own bathroom mirror. We sat in the living room, the same living room where I'd grown up. The couch was different, but the light was the same. Afternoon sun coming through the window at that particular angle I'd known my whole life. I said, I'm not here to change your mind. The decision is made. I just need you to hear me. My brother started to speak. I looked at him and said, please let me finish. He closed his mouth. I said, I understand you think I'm fine. I understand you think I don't need it. But I need you to understand what this decision communicated to me. Not the money part, the meaning part. It said that a lifetime of being the low-maintenance child, the responsible one, the one who showed up when mom was sick and never asked for anything. None of that was worth being included. And that hurts. Not because of the house, because of what it means. My mother's eyes filled up. My father looked at his hands. Daniel said, that's not what we meant. I said, what did you mean? Nobody answered. And honestly, that silence was more telling than anything they could have said. I didn't get an apology. I didn't get a reversal. I didn't get a moment where my father put his hand on my shoulder and said, I'm sorry, we got this wrong. But I got something. I said the true thing in the room where it had never been said before, and I did it calmly. And I left. That mattered more than I expected it to. After that trip, I changed how I showed up in this family. I stopped coming home for every holiday. I stopped organizing the group check-ins. I stopped being the one who called just to see how everyone was doing. I answered when they reached out. I was not cruel. I was not cold. But I stopped giving more than I received. My mother called it pulling away. I called it calibrating. There's a difference between punishing someone and protecting yourself. It took me a long time to believe I was allowed to do the second one. I started therapy around this time. My therapist, a woman in her 50s named Dr. Haynes, who had the world's most calming voice and a framed print in her office that said, what is unspoken still takes up space, helped me understand something I hadn't been able to name. The favoritism I experienced wasn't just about the will. It was a pattern that started when I was 12 years old at the kitchen table being told I was mature enough to stay home while my brother went to the beach. Every decision that followed, every, you'll be fine, every safety net extended to Daniel but not to me, was part of the same story. I had spent 29 years being a supporting character in a family that cast me that way before I was old enough to audition for something else. Understanding that didn't fix it, but it made the shape of the thing clearer. And when you can see the shape of something, you can start to move around it. Here's the thing nobody warned me about. The process of losing something you thought you had, a place in your family's story, a physical piece of your childhood, the assumption of being equally loved, also strips things away that you didn't know were weighing on you. When I stopped trying to earn my place in a family that had already decided where I ranked, I had all this energy suddenly free. I stopped performing okayness for people who used it against me. I stopped shrinking my needs because they'd been called inconvenient. I stopped being grateful for scraps of attention that I'd been taught to treat as plenty. That process wasn't fast. It wasn't clean. I cried more in the year after that confrontation than I had in the 5 years before it. I worked through things in therapy that I'd been packing down for decades. But on the other side of that, I found something I hadn't expected. Clarity. About what I wanted. About what I'd accept. About what kind of relationships, family or otherwise, I was willing to invest in. And I realized the most valuable thing my parents could have given me was never the house. It was the belief that I was worth showing up for. They didn't give me that. So I learned to give it to myself. That is the inheritance nobody writes into a will, but some of us have to earn the hard way. 2 years after that text message, I bought my own apartment. I want to describe this moment carefully because it meant everything to me in a way that's hard to explain without sounding dramatic. And by now, I try not to be dramatic. It was a Thursday afternoon. My realtor handed me the keys. Simple. Just a small set of keys on a plain metal ring. I let myself in alone. The apartment was empty. My furniture wasn't coming until the next day. Just blank walls and afternoon light coming through the windows. I walked to the center of the living room and stood there. And I thought, this is mine. Every corner of it. Not given. Not inherited. Mine. I didn't cry. I just stood there and let the quiet be what it was. Later that night, I sat on the floor with a takeout container and a glass of wine and called Priya, and she cheered loud enough that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. That apartment became the place where I had friends over for dinner and stayed up too late laughing. Where I recovered from a bad week and celebrated a good one. Where Maple figured out her favorite sunny spot by the window and claimed it permanently. It wasn't handed to me. That's exactly why it felt like mine. I've thought about why I wanted to share this. And I'll be honest, it wasn't an easy decision. Because talking about your family in public is complicated. There are people who will say I'm being ungrateful. People who will say I should have been the bigger person. People who will remind me that parents have the right to do what they want with their own property. All of that is technically true. But there's something else that's also true, and I think it matters. Some of us are raised in families that designate, very early, who the strong one is, who can handle things, who will be fine. And that designation follows us, through childhood, through the milestones, all the way to the legal documents they sign at the end of their lives. And if you're one of those people, I want you to hear something directly. You were not wrong to need more. You were not wrong to notice the difference in how you were treated. You were not wrong to grieve a place in your family's story that was never quite offered to you. The fact that you survived it doesn't mean it was okay. The fact that you built a good life doesn't cancel out the fact that you built it largely without the support your siblings had. You are not the backup child. You are not the one who gets the lesser version of love because you're strong enough to absorb it. You are a full person who deserved, who still deserves, to be seen. If you've been erased from a will, a family photo, a decision that should have included you, that is a real loss. It is okay to grieve it. It is okay to name it. It is okay to be angry before you get to the part where you rebuild. And the rebuilding will come. I promise. But you don't have to rush to the healed version. Let yourself be the unhealed version for a while. Let yourself say this was unfair without immediately softening it with, but I understand why they did it. Some things can be understood and still be unfair. My parents are not monsters. They are people who made choices, some of which were shaped by cultural ideas about which child needs more, some of which were shaped by their own blind spots, and all of which had real consequences for me. I have a relationship with them now. Smaller, more bounded, more honest than before. We talk. We don't pretend the conversation in that living room didn't happen. It exists between us, acknowledged, even if never fully resolved. Daniel and I are polite in the way people are polite when they've grown up together and share a history, but don't quite share a friendship anymore. That's okay. Some relationships are meant to exist at a certain distance. And me? I am fine. Not in the way they always said it. You'll be fine, meaning we don't have to worry about you. Fine in my own way. Fine in the way that means I know who I am, what I need, and which doors I'm choosing to walk through. I'm Elena. I'm 29 years old. And the most important thing I inherited was not a house. It was the moment I stopped waiting for someone else to tell me I was worth something. If something in this story landed with you, if you recognized yourself in the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who was told so many times that you'd be fine that you eventually stopped questioning whether that was actually true, I just want you to know, I see you. Leave a comment below. Tell me one word that describes how you felt watching this. Just one word. I read every single one. And if you know someone who needed to hear this, the sibling who was passed over, the child who was quietly erased, the friend who says, "Oh, my family is fine," but whose eyes say something different, share this with them. Not because I need the views, because they might need to know they're not alone. My name is Elena. I chose myself. I hope you do too.